Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending today's educational webinar, Microsoft Direct Routing, Benefits, Requirements, and Best Practices. If this is your first webinar with us, I hope you find today's content relevant and helpful. And for those that have been attending our webinars on a regular basis, thanks again. It's always great to see you guys at these events. I'm Joe Paquette, and I am the Business Development Director for the Northeast at New Era, and soon we'll be joined by our subject matter experts and presenters, Dan Marshall and Jeremy Morell. Housekeeping, if you have any questions during today's presentation, go ahead and type them in the question or chat fields. If we are unable to answer those during the presentation, the questions will be logged, and we will definitely follow up after the event. There's also an opportunity to ask questions on the survey at the end of today's webinar and in the follow-up email that will be sent. So with that, let's talk about today. We'll have introductions here in a moment. Today's agenda will talk about Microsoft calling direct routing, the differences, approaches, and UC video integration with Teams. That's a big one. Resources, we'll talk about those, what's available to us, and certainly, as we mentioned, Q&A. So today's goals, what are we trying to accomplish? One, to provide you with new information and insights, maybe stuff that you haven't seen yet, stuff you've been considering, and we can hopefully shed some light on what's happening. Really important, we want to make sure this information is relevant to your current state, whatever that might be. We'll talk about some of those use cases. And to clearly demonstrate how New Era can partner with you to solve any of these current challenges or initiatives. You know, it's great to talk about this stuff, but hopefully we can show you a clear path to help you. So we're all in this new norm workforce together. Imagine if we could remove the complexity of enabling and managing collaboration. If you could maximize the investment you have already made in Microsoft, in this case Teams, and extend that functionality outside the corporate network. That's what we're talking about today, and that's how we are helping our clients today. So what are we seeing in the field? Oops, sorry guys. So last week's webinar focused on Microsoft Teams governance, and we saw that managing a Teams environment can be complex. So now let's throw Teams calling or direct routing on top of that. Also, we're at a point, guys, where users will start coming back into the office. So what is that going to look like? So to that end, here's a few questions that we're seeing in the field. You know, Dan and Jeremy are talking to folks every day. So number one, a huge adoption of Microsoft Teams for internal communications and collaboration. I think we know that. Confusion between Microsoft calling and direct routing. Dan will talk about that at length, I'm sure. Another one, what is the licensing required if I want to enable Microsoft calling plans? A big one, a lot of customers have current UC platforms. How can we maximize that investment while still leveraging the Teams functionality we're looking for? I mentioned this a second ago. What's it going to look like when these users start to re-enter the office? You know, a big one, for example, is you have folks using Teams every day. They might jump into a corporate video conferencing platform, and they're going to want to start using Teams. What does that look like? And to that point, how can we integrate Teams with these existing platforms we might have today? This next slide is really one of my favorites. It really talks about what you guys are seeing. This information comes from the registration when you signed up for this webinar. So it's not data that's coming from, you know, some external place. This is folks on today's event. So I find this interesting. 85% of you are using Teams for internal collaboration today. half would like to be able to integrate that Teams with the current UC platform. Almost 70% or 7% want to extend Teams communication outside the organization, hence calling, direct routing. And this is interesting. So the folks who are looking to integrate Teams and current video conference systems. So more of a CVI platform than one touch, but the ability for us to integrate what we're doing today with Teams. So quickly, for those that are new to these webinars, new era, about 1,600 employees, offices worldwide. You can see some of the core services and offerings we have today. We're focusing on collaboration and data networking, our Microsoft practice. But I would say, all of these services tend to be very, very much integrated, and our teams can help you all the way from the data networking collaboration of today, but pro services, security, managed services, and Cloud Blue is an extensive list of managed and cloud services like hosted phone and others. So talk to your rep, and we can certainly help you with these. And before I turn it over, I know Dan will focus a little bit on the collaboration capabilities, but I did want to bring up our Microsoft competencies. And if I could leave one thing with the folks to take away from a Microsoft practice, and it fits today, we are always looking to help you maximize the investment you've made. I would imagine if we were in a room together, we had raised our hands that the majority are using 365 in some capacity today. And if we can help you leverage that investment to address things like collaboration or security or other, then we're always looking to do that. So a very holistic approach to your Microsoft consumption. So again, I'll turn this over to Dan in a second, but you can see today's presenters. And Dan, I think this will be your turn to go.
Awesome, thanks, Joe. First, obviously, thank you for everyone's time today. I know everyone's always busy with back-to-back meetings all the time, so I appreciate you dedicating some time to this so we can go through some of the key things we're seeing with Microsoft Teams, calling and direct routing. So just to get this out of the way, some key terms we're going to talk about today. If you're familiar with them, that's awesome. You'll have a leg up, but the first one's going to be SIP. So anything to do with Microsoft calling and Microsoft direct routing is going to be based upon the SIP protocol. That's how calls get set up, torn down, sent out to the PSTN, so on and so forth. The session border controller is a SIP gateway, effectively, that allows you to send calls into the PSTN. It also allows you to integrate different SIP technologies with your on-prem systems. Direct routing, that's the Microsoft method for allowing customers to provide their own PSTN services without having to use the Microsoft calling plan. Lastly, PBX and PSTN. So PBX is your on-prem system, where you've got your desk phones or your traditional system that you have on-prem. And then the PSTN is just a public switch network. So when you make a phone call from your home to a cell phone or from your business to a customer, that all goes through the PSTN. Right? So just to recap some of the key terms we're going into. So quick overview on the history of Microsoft calling. So the very first iteration of this was Microsoft Office Communicator all the way back in 2007. This was really the first Microsoft client that had the ability to make and receive point-to-point calls of some form or another. And then 4 years later, we got introduced to Microsoft Link. A few years later than that, they acquired Microsoft Skype. That was an important distinction because Microsoft, when they acquired Skype, acquired basically a closed system. So Skype used proprietary protocols that didn't operate very well with the SIP and H323 standards that were pretty prevalent back in 2015. So getting Microsoft Skype to work with existing systems, whether it was an Avaya, Cisco system, so on and so forth, didn't work very well, required a lot of interop, different type of gateways. And then we come to the day where we got Microsoft Teams, and then specifically as it relates to direct routing, Microsoft introduced that in 2018 as a way to allow customers to provide their own PSTN services for Microsoft calling plans. So I know 85% of the participants were using Teams, right? But just to quickly recap, what is this Teams client that we're using? It's Microsoft's collaboration app, and it's got point-to-point group chat, team collaboration spaces, audio video conferencing, and underneath the hood, some very basic PBX features, right? But really as a whole, everyone's using it to collaborate through work, share PowerPoint presentations, group chats, communicate, quick phone calls, quick video calls, very prevalent among a lot of our customers, and for good reason. So just a quick overview on that. Next slide, please, Joe. So the calling features as it relates to Teams, one thing I want to point out on this slide is on the lower left-hand corner there, you'll see a dial pad. If you don't have a calling plan or a telephony license with Microsoft, you'll notice on your Teams client that you do not have that dial pad. So you don't have the ability to make PSTN calls or receive PSTN calls. And in order to get that, you have to have a telephony license attached to your Microsoft O365 account. We'll talk about that on the coming slides, but I just want to point that out there. And as far as calling features goes, PSTN dialing is capable through the Microsoft calling plan and direct routing. We can do existing PBX integrations using direct routing, but all of that is dependent upon having that dial pad down there in the lower left-hand corner. Next slide, please. Who's using Microsoft Teams? I mean, since the pandemic, obviously the growth has exponentially exceeded. So just from March of 2020 through June of 2020, the daily active user count almost doubled, right? So from 44 million to 75 million. Key takeaway is everyone's using Microsoft Teams. And I can share from my personal experience that I have a strong Cisco telephony background. I've been doing it for about 20 years. And over the past 12 months, almost every one of my meetings, Teams has come up with how do we get Teams to work with our on-prem systems? How do we get PSTN calling with Teams? Teams has kind of been the theme of collaboration for me for the past 12 months. So everyone's asking these questions, and Newer's got some great options for getting these features to work for you. So next slide, please. So with Microsoft Teams, you really only have two calling options. The first one is a Microsoft calling plan. Basically, you get a subscription through Microsoft, you pay for usage. They provide your PSTN services. It's all handled through Microsoft. And the second option is direct routing, which is what we're going to talk about a majority of the presentation for today. Direct routing allows you to bring your own PSTN services along with some other added benefits, which we'll get to in some other slides. And from a licensing perspective, if you have an E1 or an E3 license, you're required to get the telephony license from Microsoft. And that telephony license is what lights up that dial pad and allows you to have a number assigned to your account. If you already have E5 licensing, you already have everything that you need. At that point, it's really just figuring out how you want to present calling to your Microsoft Teams users. All right, we're going to get into some direct routing. So direct routing is Microsoft's bring your own PSTN. So what does that really look like? What that means is that you have session border controllers that are either on-prem or they're hosted through New Era that terminate the connections into Microsoft's O365 environment, into your Microsoft tenant, and provide PSTN services either to your on-prem existing system, whether it's Cisco, Avaya, Mitel, NEC, whatever you might have there, as long as it's SIP capable. And I'll touch on that in a second. That is not a requirement either. And it provides interop for existing on-prem systems. So, next slide, please. So this is a quick overview of what the topology would look like for a typical customer environment where they've got maybe a main site and a data center. They've got redundant systems at each site. Essentially, if you look in the middle there, that session border controller is what's going to terminate and provide all the PSTN capabilities from Microsoft Teams to the on-prem environment and also to the PSTN. And this is just one sample topology. There's a few other slides we're going to go over that show you some different options and different iterations that you can go through. And one important thing I do want to point out that's not really noticeable on this, well, it's not noticeable at all actually on this presentation, is that those session border controllers, many of them have the ability to provide a PRI handoff. So if you do have a legacy PBX on-prem, maybe it's a 20-year-old Avaya system that has been updated in a while and you don't have SIP capabilities, but you can do PRIs, these session border controllers can do a PRI handoff and provide you interop to a more of a legacy on-prem system to provide you those Teams calling capabilities as well. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick overview of the comparison between Microsoft calling plans and direct routing. So the nuts and bolts of it are the Microsoft calling plans, additional $12 per month per user, and it's about 3,000 bundled minutes. So if you've got 100 users and they all have the $12 per user plan, right, then you get all those minutes all bundled together that they can share amongst all 100 users. It supports a variety of scenarios, but it typically aims more towards small businesses or remote offices where maybe PSTN connectivity isn't that great, or maybe it just makes sense to have the Microsoft calling services there. When you get over to direct routing, the direct routing is the $8 license for telephony, but also New Era offers the same calling plan for Microsoft at $8 per user, so quite a significant savings there. Some of the key benefits to doing the direct routing versus the Microsoft calling plan, you own all the numbers. You don't have to port them over to Microsoft, so you maintain ownership of your numbers. Allows you to easily move between carriers, make different decisions, and maintain ownership of those numbers. You can also provide the integration we talked about to your on-prem systems. So for a lot of our customers, it's very valuable. Joe mentioned earlier, you have this investment with this on-prem system. Maybe it's working really well for you, and there's just some users remotely that you want to provide some soft phone features to that maybe you don't have. There's a multitude of reasons why you might want to keep your on-prem system. Direct routing is the method that allows you to provide the interop between Microsoft calling and your on-prem system. Next slide, please. And this is just a quick pricing breakdown. So if you compare apples to apples, the Microsoft calling plan all in is going to be $20 per user per month. That's the $8 per user telephony license, and then the $12 calling plan all put together. With the Microsoft calling plan, no session border controllers are required. It's all handled by Microsoft. If you go the direct routing method, or if you do the direct routing with New Era with SIP as a service, it's $16 per user per month. That's $8 for the telephony license, then $8 for the PSTN calling. And session border controllers are modestly priced, all things considered. You can get a starter level SBC for about $800 that'll handle 20 concurrent calls. So pretty cost effective, actually. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of a few different options that we've got when it comes to direct routing. So there's no one size fits all. Some customers prefer to maintain ownership of all their stuff. Some customers want to have a co-term model where they host the stuff and New Era watches it for them. Other customers just don't want to have to worry about it at all. They want the benefits of direct routing through a service model, and New Era handles it soup to nuts. So in this particular diagram here, this is a customer-provided SBC, where the customer actually hosts the SBC on-prem at their location, their facilities, and it handles the integration between their on-prem systems up to Microsoft Teams and through the PSTN. So this model typically is great for customers that either have a good support structure to their IT staff on site, want to maintain ownership of everything, have things in-house, or just want to be able to quickly move between on-prem systems and Microsoft Teams routing. So next slide, please. This is the customer-provided SBC with New Era SIP as a service. Right? So in this particular model, what we've done is New Era is a FCC-regulated SIP carrier. So we're able to deliver true SIP circuits to our customers. Again, regulated by the FCC. You can port all your numbers, really cost-effective usage rates and things like that. But in this particular model, we have customers that come to us and want to have the Teams integration, but also realize that they can have some PSTN cost savings if they migrate everything onto a true SIP platform. So in this model, the SBC sits on the customer's prem site, but we deliver New Era SIP services, port all the numbers, and then handle the interop between Microsoft Teams and the existing on-prem system through the New Era SIP as a service. So next slide, please. And this is the final option where essentially New Era will host everything for you. So it's the SIP as a service offering where we deploy the SBCs in our data center. We link them into your on-prem system if you need that, or if you're a true just Microsoft calling customer where there's no existing on-prem system, you don't want any on-prem systems, but you want the cost savings of not using the Microsoft calling plan. New Era Direct Routing as a service will provide you the PSTN services, the SBC, and everything you need to get PSTN calling through Microsoft Teams. Next slide, please. And just to show some of the manufacturers that New Era is certified to work with and the ones that we support. So AudioCodes, Ribbon, and Cisco are the big three. Microsoft does offer a list of their certified SBCs that you're free to choose from. These are the three manufacturers that we've had a great success with. They have a great track record. They work well, and we have a lot of success with these three manufacturers. So. Next slide. All right, so this slide is not really relevant to direct routing, but it's a question we get from customers quite often that I wanted to kind of just throw here. And if it makes sense to have a follow-up with Joe and myself at some of the point, just feel free to reach out to us. But many customers come to us and say, hey, we're using Microsoft Teams. We've got an on-prem Polycom system. We've got on-prem Cisco systems. How do we get these things to work with Microsoft Teams? And I mentioned earlier that when Microsoft acquired Skype, it kind of became like a closed system. That's kind of true today with Microsoft Teams and their video bridging. So you can't just have a standards-based SIP or H.323 video codec call into Microsoft Teams. You have to have some kind of interop to do that. So the solution through New Era is something called a PEXIT bridge. And essentially the way this works is you have a PEXIT subscription, and then when you send out your Microsoft Teams meeting, there's a new video URI at the very bottom that says, hey, if you're joining from a Cisco or a Polycom, Lifesize, whatever you might have, call this value, and the PEXIT handles the video interop into your Microsoft Teams calling bridge. So there's a bigger conversation we can have around this, but as we're talking about the ways to make your solutions as seamlessly integrated as possible, the video comes up quite a bit, and we have some solutions at New Era that can help you do that. So I think that's it, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. That was a lot of content. I know we sort of glossed through those very quickly, but just know, I guess the takeaway is getting Dan and his team engaged in these conversations is what's going to help you get from that point A to B, whatever that might be. So, how can we help? A few ways to engage very easily. This is an offering, and you can find these in the webinar survey I mentioned. So a direct routing UC platform integration. If interested, everyone can receive this 1-hour meeting / assessment. We'll go through what you're currently doing in Teams, what your current UC platform might look like. What are the business and technical challenges you're facing? Dan brought up a number of them. Review those differences between the different offerings. Determine, this is a big one, what the potential interoperability or not might be of the current UC platform and Teams. We'll want to know that going in, right, before we start trying to put together a scope of work or buying additional stuff. And lastly, there'll be an executive summary document with these findings. Dan mentioned the Teams video interop, another large one. I know we're having these conversations truly on a daily basis. It's great to know what is the feasibility of what you are doing today to integrate with Teams. I mentioned in the beginning, our users are coming back to the office at some point, and a lot of those folks will expect to be able to use that same Teams collaboration when they go into the conference room. So how are we going to enable that to happen? So this is an offering where we can start to help you define what that might look like. Dan mentioned our SIP services. This is really easy. Allow us to review your current invoices, what you're paying today. We'll talk about what the challenges are. I'm going to show one here in a moment, a use case, but what we find often, frankly, is one of the biggest challenges is dealing with those carriers and having multiple points of responsibility, and ultimately the customer's in the middle and people are pointing fingers. So if we can help remove that, that's always a goal. Dan, before I sort of go to the next slide, am I missing anything on the SIP cost analysis? Is it truly just sort of getting those invoices and analyzing those?
Yeah, Joe, it is, right? So the reason we're looking for that is because the New Era offering, to briefly touch on that, unlike a lot of providers, we don't charge per session and we don't charge per SIP trunk. It's all usage based. So we don't care if you want to have 4 or 5 trunks into New Era or 30 trunks. The way that we essentially bill our customers is through usage. So we have 2 models. There's a pure usage-based model, but the most cost-effective is to do a bundled approach. So we find out that you're using 50,000 minutes, 100,000 minutes, whatever that is, and there's a discounted tier for where you fall within there, and it helps get you to a fixed price model for your PSTN services. So where customers get really happy with us and where we see a lot of success is maybe the customer currently has 2 PRIs they've had for 15 years, and the cost swing wildly. Some months it's $1,300, the next month it's $2,000. They see a lot of swing based upon what's happening with the business. They come to us and say, hey, how do we get a handle on this? Why don't we get this a little bit more fixed price model? We evaluate the bills and figure out, okay, on average they're using 30,000 minutes per month, but sometimes they're bursting up to 50,000. Well, no problem. New Era services automatically include a 50% burst, with your usage. So, if you subscribe to a 50,000 minute bundle and you burst up to 60,000, 65,000, or even 74,999 minutes, you see no change in your bill at all. So that's why we're looking for those bills. So in short, Joe, yeah, that's really what we're looking for to get the analysis going.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. And to that point, and Dan, I'll, if you have anything to offer, please do. But this is a recent use case. This is a small financial organization with one location. Much of what we talked about, a mix of staff working in the office and remotely. So currently they had PSTN and PRI services from a provider, and they had Comcast for internet. They were experiencing poor QoS and reliability, a lot of outages. And I mentioned before, a lot of finger pointing to resolve support issues. So we did the analysis that Dan just mentioned. We provided our SIP services, and you can see that we improved their bandwidth and reduced their spend. Not all folks would be 35%, some more, some less, but I haven't seen a case where there hasn't been some savings. Dan, am I off base on that?
No, that's accurate, Joe.
Finally, two other things, these really from last week. If you've deployed teams and you did it based on the pandemic, but we really didn't go through a formal training, this is a one-on-one customer-facing training. So we will have a couple 1-hour sessions, which will be 45-minute presentation with Q&A. Most importantly, they're recorded on your tenant, so you can repurpose those as new hires come on, or if you want to just have additional trainings. Jeremy, anything you'd add there to what you've been delivering?
Just that a lot of customers will divide the training so that they'll have one targeted toward the basic users, and sometimes the second will be targeted toward maybe a more advanced audience, or maybe specialized IT specifics in managing and adding members, and sort of the team's management aspects that might not be for the general population. So that's one way to split that, and we certainly can accommodate it.
Awesome. And then Jeremy, I'll let you stay around here for a second. Our team's assessment, again, I think would sort of harken back to last week a little bit. Let's review what you're doing today, what the current team's functionality is, certainly licensing. But ultimately for me, and Jeremy, I'll look for you to add to this, is how are we using Teams today? What is the collaboration, file share? Where's SharePoint coming in? What's the governance look like? It's sort of this overall assessment to say, here's your state of the state, and here's what best practice looks like. Here's maybe a way to get there. Jeremy, what would you add to that?
Certainly, just again to highlight the differences and similarities between SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, and the right way to approach collaboration so that we're safe and secure and following best practices and standards.
And then I'll just mention one more thing. That goes back to the very beginning when I talked about consuming Microsoft and leveraging all the tools. That's where this might come into play. The different offerings for security, for example, might tie in very nicely to this. So again, trying to really maximize that investment. I saw one question about, I think a deck that's been resolved. If there's any questions, feel free to type them in the survey that will be coming out. Otherwise, we have a couple events coming up. A neat one at the end of April is the top 10 security topics from Ignite. If you were able to attend or not, we're going to consolidate those and sort of put them into practical use. And then in May, we're scheduled to talk about Azure Sentinel. For those that haven't seen that yet, it's a great tool, a SIM-like tool to help you analyze what's going on in the environment and react and respond and so forth. So 2 events coming up soon. So with that, I really want to thank you for joining today. If you have more questions, you can see the contact information there. Certainly reach out to your rep, reach out to myself. We'll make sure we get those answers. And again, lastly, those offerings are in the survey, so you can select those as well as answer any questions there. Dan and Jeremy, thank you so much as always for presenting today. And everyone, thanks again and have a great day. Take care.